I am very happy to have Beth Granger with me today on the show. You have such an important story and a great book with a great title, which we'll talk about. And also, there is this piece that is so important to talk about, which is when you think you're done with something and it's not done with you.
Yeah.
And there is a lot that happens where, I'll tell people, if we think we're sort of coming to the end of what they came into therapy for, don't worry. If something comes up, you know where to find me. And sometimes it happens. You get into a new job or a relationship or whatever. There's some traumatic event or a memory or a trigger, and there's no shame in saying, actually, I'm not quite totally healed. In fact, those moments are moments that sometimes are good for information to let you know what's still important to work on and to get through and to kind of expel out of you if you can. And so I think those moments, as difficult as they are actually valuable. So we're definitely going to talk about that, but I'd love you to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me on. I am so honored. Okay, so my name is Beth Granger, as you mentioned, and I wrote a book that just released last week called Born and Raised, spelled Razed. Surviving the cult was only half the battle. And you've alluded to that. I
Mhm.
got through the 30 years, was born into it. But that was just the beginning of the second half of the adventure, if you will. I was the first baby born to staff members at a private elite boarding school in Canada called Grenville Christian College. And it was advertised as an Anglican institution, but in truth, it was a cult hiding in plain sight. We even duped the Anglicans. I mean, nobody knew what was going on behind the walls. So it started out innocently enough. But when I was 3, our school fell prey to 2 leaders of a commune in Cape Cod called the Mothers, and the commune's called the Community of Jesus. And these 2 leaders, under their influence, our school became, well, an offshoot of their community and an institution of paranoia that brainwashed, abused, and terrorized its residents for decades until the truth came out when the school closed and due to bankruptcy in 2007. And
Mm.
then, just to give a spoiler alert, well, I don't want to give it all away right now, but that sets the scene, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay. And it's interesting, the term the mothers, that is chilling. I mean, not having met these people, but just that feels like a horror movie. I don't know why just that term, the mothers.
Well, you're very intuitive, I think.
Right? Because
Yeah.
it sort of gives you, or would give parents or the community, or the people probably giving them tax exemption, this impression that it's gonna be motherly, which is protective and, maybe kind and nurturing.
And
Mm,
the opposite
yeah.
was, I'm like, if as well, I might as well talk about their philosophy because
Yeah,
it
please.
was the foundation for everything. They had, like all cult leaders, they had a way of love bombing and telling everyone, all the staff at our school, you have a special. They prophesied and they said God was telling them that our school would be blessed by God if we followed their leadership, and all of our financial problems would be taken care of, and we'd have more students than we could possibly deal with. So all the big promises, but right off the bat, they went. I don't know, how do you explain. You have the love bombing, and you have the you guys are great. We see awesome things for you, and then in the same breath, they're breaking people down right from the get go,
Yeah.
and they're we had to listen to their teaching growing up. It's the whole indoctrination. We had the
Mhm.
teaching tapes and such, and I, before reading the book and before trial, which is we'll talk about, um, I listened to a lot of the tapes to remind myself of some of their messages, and it was just so clear that their mission was to break spirits and have people drowning in shame, and the kinds of things they would preach were things like, "The key is death to self." They said that again and again. "You are nothing. Of yourself, you can do nothing." They even preached all human love is sin before God. And that was a key factor in dismantling families. So you think of mothers as being loving and,
Yeah.
as you said, but they dismantled families purposely from the get go. And in our school, many of us staff kids were, but when I was 4, I was taken away from my parents. And my parents and the other staff like them were told that they were blind to our sins and that their sin of idolatry had to be eradicated or they wouldn't be any use to the community. But what I learned was that it's a sin to love me. And, you don't get over that uh,
Right.
anytime soon.
No,
I
no.
still, yeah, it still hits me every time I think about that. But
Right.
yeah, so to your point, the mothers were anything but motherly
No.
on purpose.
On purpose.
Yeah.
It's reminding me, and, there are a lot of boarding schools that we hear about, that are troubling at best,
Hmm.
um, almost sociopathic at worst. Um, and, I was recently thinking about these Native American boarding schools,
Mm.
and just hearing about, erasing someone's self, cutting their hair, having them dress a certain way, they can't speak their language, not being able to really have a self, an identity, and that it's despicable, and I think it is the ultimate symbol of selfishness to do that to people, to decide what is true about them and what they need and what they're supposed to be like and what they're supposed to believe, but also kind of what they deserve and what they don't. And I
Yeah.
think, I yes, I want to be able to get back to that phrase that it's a sin to love me. I mean, what do you think these people, it's like I want you to get into their heads, which I'm sure is not a happy place to be, kind of a dark place. What was their, prohibition really about, when it came to love? Was it that, or just the idea of children being
Mhm.
sinful in this way, even though I know original sin is an idea that is religiously based, but what was it, why was this so important to them?
Well, all I can think of is that they just kept saying idolatry. Everything is idolatry. Loving anything other than God is idolatry. And so that was one of their main preaching
Mhm.
topics, really. And they also abandoned their own children and they abandoned their husbands. And then we found out when the school closed and all the shit hit the fan, we found out they were actually a lesbian couple. So they were really living a double life. And I
Mhm.
don't know, you hear this about so many cult leaders who just preach one thing and do absolutely the opposite, or some messed up other life that
Mhm.
you have no idea about. But um as far I think, you know, when you dismantle families, you're and friendships too, I should add, because I was a
Mhm.
staff kid, but they also did the same thing to the students who were just there boarding. They would not allow close friendships. And if a two girls were getting to be close, they would separate them in every possible way, physically, change their classes, change their assigned seating in the dining room,
Mhm.
uh, and, where they lived in their dorm rooms. So, yeah, it was not basically, they wanted us isolated so we're more easily manipulated and controlled and more demoralized, I suppose,
Mhm.
because you can control people that don't have close ties. And there was a whole spy network too, which I haven't gotten into. I mean, there's a whole all-you-can-eat buffet of coercive tactics being used,
Mhm.
which they instituted. One of them, as I said, was a whole network of spying. So you were expected, they appointed leaders at the school. They actually lived in Cape Cod, but they appointed the leaders as their sort of spokespeople in the Grenville in Canada. And those leaders would report to them. And
Mhm.
then their staff below them would report, up the chain, but we're reporting on everyone's sins.
Yeah.
And also, we were required to write letters of confession, which were used against us. But
Mhm.
the whole spy network, they even taught the students, the prefects, to be part of this. You know, they had to be reporting on people, and so
Mhm.
it goes to the whole thing of just separating people. Not You can't trust others. You are
Right.
on your own.
Right.
And
Oh, yeah.
so yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
that answers your question.
Yeah. Wow. Right. And the whole spy network thing is, that's pretty commonplace. I don't mean to say that it's
Hmm.
not devastating, but it happens in, I think, almost every kind of cultic group that
Yeah,
I've heard about, because knowledge is power to the
yeah,
leaders, and you get points, right,
yeah.
for reporting on people. And I think a lot of people will be able to be convinced, if they're good people, that they're doing this for other people to kind of keep them in line,
Yeah.
and that that's being helpful. It's called different things in different groups, but also just this sort of, writing yourself up too, and writing up other people, in the ICC, the International Church of Christ. There's a sin study that you're supposed to do, and write down everything.
Yeah.
And if there's not enough, they will be
Mhm.
disappointed in you. You need to
Yeah.
add more and more and more, right? And in Scientology, they're called KRs, knowledge
Yeah.
reports.
Mhm.
So it is pretty commonplace, and then you're right, the outcome is then you don't know whom to trust, and that carries over into the world outside. Like,
Yeah.
why am I telling this to this person? What are they gonna do with this information? When I run a support group, people will wanna share, but they'll need to know first, why? Why do I need to say this? Is this gonna come back to bite me? Because that's
Mhm.
always how it was.
Yeah.
Um, is this for someone else's benefit, really, or is
Yeah.
this for mine?
Yeah, and I didn't mention one of the other parts of that whole thing was the public shaming we had. Uh,
Mm.
that was just built into our life. So it was called in our school. It was at the community. They started out by calling them light sessions. So they bring your sin to light.
Uh-huh.
And but what it was were public shaming sessions where people were attacked for their sins, whether they were real or imagined. And you you either were required to confess your sins publicly, or
Mhm.
more often than not, people would accuse you of sins. And if you tried to fight back, that would not go well. But so whether or not you're on the hot seat, everyone feels paranoid because you never know if you'll be next. And some of the sessions were, I mean, they just happened all the time. They could be a group of maybe 4 or 5 people
Mhm.
ganging up on one, or full school light sessions. So assemblies of hundreds of people. And these are, in those cases, they were standing children up whose parents were paying 20, $30,000 a year, and accusing them of outrageous sins, to the point where they're calling, a 12-year-old girl a whore, because they found her smoking, or whatever. Like, it's just it's mind-blowing, and I it took me years to remember even the things that happened there, because I learned to dissociate, and
Mhm.
normalize it all. But, yeah, light sessions, they were incredibly effective in Well, as I said, breaking people down and also
Right.
isolating. And this, even the prefects were expected to stand up and attack other students. So then you're you're just breaking the bonds between every possible, student. It
Mhm.
was pretty awful.
It is pretty awful. These light sessions were very dark, actually.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just to go back for a moment and then we can move forward, just about your
Mhm.
parents
Mhm.
and hear what, with them getting involved. And also, and this happens, I've talked to a lot of families where they saw a transition happening, new leadership, new rules, things got weird, things got strict, things got abusive, and they stayed.
Mhm.
And this is not to point fingers, lay blame, just it's just something that happens. Uh, and so I wonder about your parents, what drew them to this at first, and did they notice what was changing?
The interesting thing is they're both very smart people, but they can hardly put into words why they stayed
Mm,
or even understand. They say to this day they don't understand how it happened. They'll say things like, in my dad's case, well, they had both moved from the States up to Canada. It was a big risk, and they sold all their belongings. It was sort of like a missionary move, They thought they were
mhm.
getting into the missions and
Yeah,
teaching at the same time.
yeah.
But when the school was struggling for the first 3 years, and my dad was the principal at the first 3 years,
Oh,
he was so dedicated to the success of the school that they thought these mothers could be the answer.
mm,
And their community seemed to be thriving, and it seemed successful, and really, they had an excellent arts program, music program, and my dad's also a music director. So he looked at the good, and he tried to believe that, this was God's tough love, if you will.
mhm, mhm,
And my mom would probably be the similar thing, just they believe that, you know, I would talk about weaponized religion, God preaches, about sacrifice and the
mm,
importance of, denying yourself and all of those sorts of messages that are biblical.
mhm,
They interpreted that, this is just part of the gig if we're going to succeed,
mhm.
And then I guess it's just so complicated how coercive control can just sort of hijack people's brains. I don't
Right,
know. It just like,
right.
how do you give up your children? It wasn't just me, and my older brothers were also taken away. And, and and they bought it, and
Right,
they're still coming to terms with that now. It's very painful.
right. It is very painful, and I think part of, part of what we learn about when it comes to things like this is, mm, kind of the slow burn of it, that it happens gradually over time. And that just as you're saying that, when these changes are happening, people are losing themselves, their voices,
Mhm.
their rights. They're giving more and more over, not by choice, to
Yeah.
people, running things. And even the staff is doing the same. And it's usually seen as for the greater good.
Yeah.
Usually also there's a lot of fear, right, that gets caught up in all of this, so you feel like now it would be dangerous to not keep going with this momentum because it's
Mhm.
gonna save everyone or keep everyone safe or you know, whatever the dire
Yeah.
prediction is.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it goes without saying the whole coercive control right off the bat, they were taught that God has a special call on them. And if
Mhm,
they leave now, they're going to go to hell. Like they're turning their back on what God has specifically called them to do.
mhm, mhm,
And I said my dad was the principal. The mothers came in and they moved everyone's jobs. They changed everything, even even what we wore and what our hair looked like and everything. So my dad lost his role. He said in the morning he was the principal, in the afternoon he was digging ditches. So like this was not an
wow.
easy easy thing for them, but I think they just like you said, they wanted it for the greater good, and they try to trust God
Mhm,
and
mhm.
subject themselves to what they consider to be a, you know, wise leadership. I don't know.
Right,
Yeah.
right. There's this
Mm.
interesting thing that happens, and I think it's part of human nature, but also social psychology, that I've noticed that when there are preachers or teachers, gurus out there who are no longer making sense, which is not about this necessarily, but there's sort of two, I guess, classifications that I see a lot. One where they're talking in word salad and people assume, it must be that it's of this higher level, and I just don't get it. I need to really try harder to get. Okay,
Mhm.
so there's that, and it really is that it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And you could spend a lot of time trying to figure that out and bang your head against the wall. And that actually does happen to a lot of people where they think there's something wrong with them. And
Yeah.
then there is the other classification of people who are beyond strict and mean and cruel, and then you think they're more holy. You think
Mhm.
they have the answer. You think they are the ones who are gonna keep you safe, but they're just sociopaths.
Yeah. And that was
And
what was going on.
right,
I
that's
think it
what
was a
it
mix of
felt
both, but I
a
think it was the
mix
second
of
one for sure.
okay, sure, sure, let's do both because oh, why not? Because that just sounds horrific. I'm so sorry. It was wow.
I mean, yeah, I don't think they had I've heard like Keith Raniere's word salad, and it wasn't that crazy town, but when you think about being preached to and believing that, human love is sin,
Right, right.
I mean, that's kind of cuckoo.
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
but they eventually bought it,
Mhm.
and it didn't take long either. So yeah, it's definitely a cautionary tale about
Right.
how you can take over a bunch of well-meaning, smart, very dedicated staff members
Mhm.
and turn them
Mhm.
into um,
Mhm.
sheep and also perpetrators. So, and also, oh, that was another thing I wanted to mention is that they were under so much stress as cult members, which they
Mhm.
didn't realize they were.
Mhm.
But, cult members are being treated terribly, that they were barely surviving it. So they turned a blind eye to their children, and they
Mm.
didn't understand that it was also happening to us.
Yeah.
And they've told me that time and again that we had no idea this happened to you. Well, that's because they weren't raising me. And yeah,
Yeah, right.
and we all learned to be pretty good actors. Like you had to appear to be okay.
Yeah.
So they thought I was doing okay.
Right. The whole you had to appear to be okay, there are a lot of people who have left cultic organizations, who have left fundamentalist
Mhm.
organizations, controlling relationships where they had to also feel and present like everything was
Mhm.
okay and that they weren't with an abusive person. Um, that they can pass as okay,
Yeah.
and then not really get what they need, and not get that kind of compassion. People don't know they're really suffering. They might
Yeah.
not even know they're suffering.
Yeah. I mean, that's the story of anyone leaving a cult, basically. Well, I mean,
Mhm.
most people I would imagine are kind of like, you know, what I did, which is you try to outrun the trauma and you present as fine, and people have no
Yeah.
idea what's
Right.
going on until everything catches up and you fall apart at some
Yes.
point. But,
But
we've mentioned the light sessions, we've mentioned the
yeah.
the dismantling of families, but another huge part of it was soul crushing discipline. So
Okay.
anytime that they use discipline as a weapon. And
Hmm.
as I said, the whole goal was to break people down. Well, discipline did it. It was soul crushing, but it was also incredibly cruel and unpredictable. So um, you could get the usual was if you were put on discipline, you were taken out of class, You weren't allowed to wear the uniform. So right away, everyone knew something, you had done something wrong. And
Mm.
you were separated from everyone and not allowed to speak. You were put on silence. You weren't allowed to look at anyone, make eye contact, and you were put on hard labor, the worst sorts of jobs around the campus, and usually in the kitchen. That was indefinite. It was almost always indefinite. So they wouldn't say, "Okay, you've got 3 days." It would be like until you've changed. And often you were put on discipline for something like a bad attitude, where you couldn't quite define it and you didn't know what you'd done wrong. You had to change, like, your personality, everything, and also you were, constantly being light sessioned through it. So, keep confessing. We know there's more. You're not confessing at all, that sort of thing. Like, my worst time on discipline lasted 29 days, and I started to think I would never get off, and so I confessed something that I had been really I never thought I would ever confess. I had stolen a chocolate bar and, a year prior, and one other thing, and I confessed it even though I'd never been caught, and that resulted in me being booted out of the school and sent to cult headquarters in the States. Um, but indefinitely, I'll add. But back
Okay.
to the normal discipline. So that was one form of discipline. Another one was paddling. They had a long paddle, sort of the size of a canoe paddle, and y- people were beaten very severely. And I've talked to men who are in their 50s who can still feel it to this day. They say, like, just the pain of,
Mhm.
and you could get paddled for having a bad attitude again, or sinning in your mind, or not turning someone in. That was a big one. If you knew someone had smoked, for example. And then the disciplines were so, also, I said, unpredictable. Like, you could get your hair cut short for not for so you wouldn't be a temptress. Notice I don't have short hair. That
Mhm.
happened to me. Like,
Mhm.
it was it yeah, it just the disciplines were, really awful,
Wow.
and growing up, I got so many different disciplines that I haven't even mentioned here, and each one just you
Yeah.
just feel like you're drowning in shame. So as a staff kid, I don't know if I mentioned this, but staff were expected to take vows of, obedience for life, and, that started right off the bat in the 70s. And so when I was 21, I took the vows to the mothers, obedience to the mothers. So all through my 20s, the disciplines I was undergoing just kept getting more cruel and unusual. One year I was part of a group of women who wasn't allowed to have showers or baths or sleep on a bed or wear makeup or hair products for a year. I mean, that was just part of a discipline that we had. And again, it was indefinite. We didn't know. We thought it would last for a week and it just kept going. By the time I was nearing my 30s, I started to have the thought in my head, I didn't think I could ever be happy there. And that was a very rebellious thought. I knew it was. Because who cared if you were happy? Like, in fact, you were supposed to deny yourself, right? And be okay with that.
Mhm.
But I started to want to be happy. and
Mhm.
and I also was losing hope that I'd ever get married. Actually, I'd lost hope by the age of 27, because we weren't allowed to marry outside of the group. And there were only about 100 of us at the school, and very few men and more women. So, it didn't help that I actually did get engaged to a man I was working with in, the finance office, and he broke off our engagement for no reason, while we were planning the wedding. He couldn't give a reason. And I just fell apart. Like, I just sunk into a depression that I'd never experienced before. And I think it's because I got a taste of what it was like to be loved and
Mhm.
to be special to somebody.
Mhm.
And to live without that just felt soul crushing. And it didn't help that I was pushing 30 and still a virgin and I wanted kids. And I didn't think, like, that was basically, I would be a spinster. Not only that, you had take single vows if you had not married by a certain age. I don't know why. I guess they just let's just let's just put more nails on the coffin, you know.
Right, right, right.
so
Exactly.
so anyway, he broke it off, and he then went on to be a monk at the Community of Jesus. I mean, he's still there to this day. So soon
Wow.
after that, I'm down in the depths of despair, and I had knee surgery, which is completely unrelated, and yet it does matter because in the process of getting healed from it, I
Mhm.
was given permission to go off campus for physio, and then the recommendation was that I get off Aquafit. So I was allowed to go to the YMCA and enter the
Mhm.
outside world.
Uh-huh.
And I met people, and I started loving exercise, and I got fit and strong, and I started feeling like a caged animal. And there's way more to the story, but I started questioning things. And instead of getting feeling, the light sessions at that point started making me angry instead of feeling ashamed. Like, I started
Uh-huh.
realizing they're making this shit up. Like,
Uh-huh. Right.
they are lying in some case. In one case, I knew they were lying to me about my sin that they were making up, and I just was like, I don't even care what you say anymore." And I knew that I still thought I was called by God to be there for my life, but I just didn't think I could had it in me anymore. And it took me about 3 years to get the strength and the courage to leave, even though I thought it might still mean I'm going to hell. I realized I'm already living in hell. So I
Mhm.
finally left feeling that I was failing them, and I was the black sheep and they were the white flock. I just knew I felt so rebellious, and I just couldn't live out my vows the way I knew they expected me to.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's more detail in the book, but I would add that it's interesting. I was so brainwashed that I could have left earlier. One thing that I think a lot of people don't leave is because of money. And my grandfather had left me $40,000 in my early 20s when he died. And he left all of his money equally to all of us. And I didn't realize he gifted me the keys to my freedom until
Oh,
my 30s. So,
right.
yeah, it didn't occur to me. But
Mhm.
that's how I finally left. And it wasn't a, middle of the night escape. It was very methodically planned how I was gonna get out and make my
Mm.
way. But when I did, I didn't know anyone, and I left, everyone I knew, and it wasn't easy. So,
I'm
yeah.
sure. I'm sure it was not. One of the things that they say really is most devastating for people who are manipulators and controllers is to say something that no longer matters to people.
That's
And
right.
right, it's not like they say something that you disagree with because they don't mind kind of baiting you into a fight and to be able to use that as a way to kind of prove you wrong, and they kind of like that engagement at times. But if you just seem like, all right, it's just pissing me off, it's not really making me scared, and I'm not going inward to berate myself, I'm just wondering, how they just made all this up out of whole cloth, and I don't have to listen to it anymore. I mean, that is a very powerful transitional time
Mhm.
where you're taking your power back and taking it away from them. It really is significant.
Yeah, there was one I won't say the scene, but I'm like, there's a scene in the book where I just snap and turn from somebody who's used to taking it and will not only take it, but will actually believe what they're saying, to
Mhm.
someone who, "I'm not taking that." Like, that's not to say, I had years ahead of me to sort of unpeel the onion just to
Right.
realize that I still did believe a lot of what they were saying, you
Sure.
know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course. Of
Uh,
course. I mean, if things are fear-based,
mhm.
they get under your skin. If they're also repeated over and over throughout. many years, they get
Yeah.
under your skin, no question. I'm curious also, just as you were leaving, um, how did you inform people or did you not? How did you tell your parents? I'm just curious about that
Yeah.
transitional
Well,
time.
it was, gradual, actually. We weren't allowed to work at the school unless we had taken lifetime vows, and we had to live at the school as well. I realized I was too scared to leave both my work and my community, my church
Mhm,
community at the same time, so I wondered. I was around 28, and I thought, "Is there any way I can keep working here, but live in the outside community?" And basically, I framed it. I asked permission, and I waited 3 weeks, but I
mhm,
framed it as saying, "I just need to test the outside world," sort of like the Amish do. And I didn't know if they would go for it, but I had a job that was quite trained in the
mm,
finance. And so I hoped that they would want me to enough to keep me on. And I
mm,
also asked them to triple my salary. Like, I was being very audacious. But I guess they needed me, because some other staff were starting to bail,
mhm,
and, so they said yes. So for almost 3 years, I worked there, but lived in the outside community, getting up
mm,
to all kinds of heathen things, I'm sure, in their mind, and, that was very hard. I would go to school and work there every day feeling like picturing myself with the scarlet letter, you
mhm,
know,
mhm,
and knowing that all kinds of terrible rumors were probably abounding, but I just knew no other way, and in those 3 years, I figured out what I wanted to do, and
mhm,
then I,
mhm,
applied to university and got in, uh, to become a teacher, and once I got that, I gave them 6 months notice, and I
mhm.
finally left when I was 31
Wow,
and
okay.
became a teacher that year. The next year, I got hired as a full-time teacher and started my life, so, yeah. I
Incredible.
actually was never a teacher at Grenville because that was another way they disciplined me. I wanted to be a teacher desperately. I was very academic, and
Mhm,
they they were so good at making people who, were passionate and talented at cutting them down a peg or cutting them off at the knees. So all through high school, I wasn't allowed to see my grades because they wanted to annihilate my ego or haughtiness, as they called it. And so when I made it clear that I wanted to be a teacher in my 20s, the leader said, "You'll never be a teacher here because you'll be too haughty and too egotistical." And which is crazy because it was supposed to be an elite school and I would have been a really good teacher for them. But yeah,
mhm,
so
mhm.
yeah.
Right. I mean, and also the irony isn't lost on me that someone who is running a school who says that to you is being haughty and egotistical. Um, right?
Yeah,
They
I
know what's
know.
best. They're gonna have dominion over you and
Good point.
power and take it away from you so they can still hold it over you.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, like a
Oh
lot of
god.
things,
Can't
right?
make this shit up.
Right? Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but what an interesting thing, though. I think people, um, I think people who go into teaching or go into academia or go into being a student somewhere, that can also be really enlightening and really empowering. And also just getting into the realm of questioning and critical thinking,
Mhm.
how to assess information, and that you can have a different opinion than the next person, and it's okay. There's a lot about that that is just so markedly different from a cult experience that just being a student or being a teacher after, I think, has
Mhm.
been really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people say, "How are you such a kind person or, compassionate or whatever after living through the hell of Grenville or any cult?" And I don't know. I feel like a lot of us who are born into it or even just experience it, your intuition tells you to be the opposite of what they're
Mhm.
like, and that's kind of always been my guiding force, I guess. Of, you just want to do anything but how you were treated,
Right.
and um yeah, so I guess that's kind of awful silver lining, but a good silver lining. But yeah, um,
Okay. And so right, so I know a lot has happened since you've left, so let's
mhm.
talk about some of the situations that you've been faced with.
Interestingly enough, when I left, I did not realize it was a cult. As I said, felt I was the wrong one. I viewed as myself as the rebel who left, and I wasn't the only one. Anyone who
Mhm.
left was shunned, and um, I tried really hard. Actually, that was why I took so long to leave because I wanted them to like me. I wanted them to
Right,
still
right.
accept me and understand that I was still someone they could welcome into their life. Or, I'd come back for Easter or Christmas and y try to feel comfortable. Um, but all that being said, I didn't come to any understanding of how cultish it was until the school closed, and that was 6 years after I had left. And the school all of a sudden, went bankrupt because everyone who had been so badly abused all those decades felt free to talk about it online, and they found the internet website FactNet, which is
Uh-huh.
um are you aware of that? It's
Yeah, yeah.
the cult. It was one of a cult's website where you could post anonymously, and so there was a heading for Grenville Christian College and the Community of Jesus, and it just blew up that summer. Thousands and thousands and
Mhm.
thousands of posts from former students and staff and members of the community. And since then, FactNet has been bought by Scientology. It's shut down. But that summer, I was on maternity leave, and I had a little extra time to be reading this stuff, and it just blew my mind, and my eyes were opened like I'd never experienced before. And I realized not only had I been abused, but I realized the extent to which the students had been abused. I'd never understood how damaging it would have been for them to come into, like, be just plopped into a cult and then
Mhm.
treated as though they had bought in, as though they had signed up for that. Do you know what I mean?
Right, right.
Because
Yeah.
they hadn't, and they didn't understand what was happening. At least I had normalized it. They didn't, and it was very damaging for them to be treated this way and then sent off into the outside world, um, so damaged and shattered. So right away, I realized so much, and then I started investigating what cults were all about, and I realized we checked off every box. And then soon after, the school made it very clear, the school leaders, that they weren't going to take accountability. They weren't going to apologize like properly. And in fact, the final headmaster went on record in the Globe and Mail, which is our national newspaper, saying that there was no truth to the allegations. And when that happened, my blood boiled because I knew he was lying. And so that's what spurred me and a few other people to seek justice through the courts. And we made this little band of people, little steering committee, and started talking to lawyers. And um, 3 law firms got interested. They, we had to write statements of experience. I could barely do it though. Like was just coming to understand it, and it was so
Mhm.
excruciating for me to let myself think about how abusive the school had been, and I could only write 8 pages that summer. Whereas my friend who had been at the school as a student for 1 year, she wrote 40 pages. That was 40 pages of details that she remembered. I couldn't remember anything. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
could, but it was all generalities, and
Uh-huh.
I had so many years of therapy to go still, you know what I mean?
Mm.
But I knew at that point, all I knew was that something was wrong with me. I was starting to have some real issues, and I was already in therapy. I didn't know what they were exactly, except for an eating disorder. But I
Mhm.
knew I had some major healing to do, and I knew my intuition told me that this lawsuit was gonna force me to heal in by being involved, and right away, they asked me to be a representative plaintiff, and for that it was like 1,400 people we were representing. I said yes,
Mhm.
scared
Mhm.
shitless, but I said
Mhm.
yes, and it took us 16 years, and we were the first. historical abuse case to win a trial in Canada. I had no idea what I was getting into, but, um but I
Wow.
was right. It forced me to heal, and it forced me to heal in ways I never expected because I thought I was healing all through it. We kept on having to do depositions and all kinds of stuff, but it wasn't until the trauma really caught up to me like, fast forward to 2019, the year of the trial,
Mhm.
that's when I couldn't run anymore. I had been racing to sort of escape. I
Mm,
was dealing with it, but only just a little. You know what I mean? Only enough
mhm.
to, like, see the therapist once a month and basically put the Band-Aids on the problems. But,
Right.
it caught up with me in 2019 and I had to quit work. I actually had to go through benzo withdrawal, which I don't know if you know what that's like, but it can be debilitating enough to put
Right.
people off work just on its own, and that's not even counting childhood trauma that comes up, you know? So I went
Right.
through that and, I had to stop work, I had to stop teaching, and, I had to deal with the past, and, I've been sidelined for a few years because of that. For me, after a couple years of intense benzo withdrawal, which meant I couldn't cope, I couldn't function, I couldn't read, I couldn't go on the computer, could barely drive. So it was really bad, but after about 2 years, I started writing about 20 minutes a day, and the
Mhm.
writing process was what brought all those I had dissociated so
Yeah.
much through the 30 years of Grenville. It forced me to remember, but it also forced me and allowed me to heal, and
Yeah.
I realized very quickly how powerful it was. I mean, the tears, I mean so
Mhm.
I did it for 2.5 years, and I wrote that whole book. It took me 2.5 years to write the first draft, and, but I knew that I was basically doing that to heal, and it
Mhm.
was the only thing that would work.
Mhm.
Um, and, yeah, I've kind of covered a lot right there.
Yeah, so right, so I wanna jump in here and say a
Yeah.
couple things because well, first, bravo to you, or brava, as they say, for but it is really, um, quite an amazing thing that you were able to, at some point, for 20 minutes a day, just sit
Mm,
down to do this, as painful as it was, but really having the sense that it was gonna help you in some significant ways, which
mhm,
it did. It is an important thing to put things, on paper or even just have them if you record them, if you talk to a friend, you're honoring your experience.
mhm.
You are saying, "This happened."
Yeah.
And you're also helping to develop clarity as you say it. I think about the people who I've talked to who wanna tell me their experience, whether it's on the podcast, whether it's in private therapy, whether it's in the support group, where you see them starting or you hear them starting, and then they stop, and you can almost see the wheels turning of self-doubt,
Yeah.
of imposter syndrome, and,
Yeah.
right? And, "Am I making this up? Is God gonna punish me for saying this? Am I misremembering it? Is
Yeah.
this sinful?" On and on and on. And or am I just being dramatic? Am I being right? All the
Yeah.
things, right? That you've been trained, that kept you silent and that kept you also really doubting your own experience of trauma,
Mhm.
throughout it so that it didn't fully register. And also, if you weren't really supposed to be happy and you're supposed to somehow suffer, which is often given a value in these
Oh, yeah.
places, right? That, so what are you complaining about? It was supposed to be bad.
Mhm.
So and that was for your benefit, right? So there's
Yeah.
so much that can keep you from being able to say, "This happened to me and this was wrong,
Yeah.
period."
It started because I started the 20 minutes a day, basically out of fear of the trial, because it was about 3 months before the trial, and I
Mhm,
knew I'd be on the stand, and
mhm,
I thought first of all, my brain was already hijacked by the benzo withdrawal. I could barely form sentences at that point. So I thought the only way I can do this is start writing. And
Mhm.
I would write in my journal, and I'd already been getting therapy at that point for over 10 years from an excellent psychologist. But what I was remembering in the journal, she'd never heard before because, you go to therapy once a month. You're basically dealing with the day to day, like, help me get through. This
Right.
happened last week, you know?
Right.
You're not talking about your past. So I started bringing the journal in, and I would sit in the chair, like, shaking, thinking, as she read it, thinking, "I wonder if I'm boring her. Like, this is probably all just like like making a mountain out of a molehill." And she'd look up from my journal, just appalled by the things
Mhm.
that I was telling her and things that I had completely forgotten. But every time I go to therapy, every time I um, tried to get ready for the trial, I was having to convince myself and learn that this wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. Even going into the trial, I looked at the judge the whole time thinking, does she think we're a bunch of whiners? Like, is this just,
Yeah.
are we just making something out of nothing? Because I had normalized it so much. So the writing really did allow me to go back in time and feel as though I was a little one, being put on a diet at the age of 5 because of my gluttony. How did that feel? Or just wishing that I would lose weight so maybe they'd let me live with my parents. Just going through, and when you write, you have to feel the pain. You have to process it, and that is what we have to do to get healing. And I'm not saying everyone has to become a writer, but that was just so transformative for me to feel what it's like to inhabit your body as a young kid and then actually process the pain that you weren't safe to process then.
I mean, also, well, 2 things. I was gonna bring up something from that you said before, and now I wanna respond to also what you just mentioned. When you said before that one of the things that made you really upset or really angry, was when you knew this person was lying,
Mhm.
that none of those things had happened, right?
Mm.
Um, but that you knew, as you said it, that he knew he
Yeah.
was lying. That's a whole other level,
Yeah.
right? And that is the thing that sometimes really gets people. Like, yeah, I know that that's not true, but I have been held to a certain standard of needing to confess everything,
Mhm.
needing to be truthful about everything, needing to make stuff up even that,
Yep.
is now a sin. But they can lie and know that they're lying, and that's okay. So just that dichotomy
Mhm.
there is enough to really set a lot of people off, which is an interesting thing that you mentioned. Really, really powerful.
Oh, it's so powerful. One time I was getting ready for a deposition and I was having all the same doubts. Are we making this up? Does this even matter? Did this actually hurt us? And then I stumbled across a YouTube video of a documentary made in the 90s where they were trying to decide, a local station was interviewing people who had left the community of Jesus, who were saying it was a cult. And so they actually interviewed one of the mother who was in charge at the time. It was just her. And in front of the camera, she said that children were never separated from their parents. She said they were never interrogated for their sins, and that if she knew about that, she would be quickly putting a stop to it. I mean, I nearly fell off my chair. And
Yeah.
this was just a few days before a deposition. Now, that was the fuel that I needed to go in there and tell them more truth because, yeah, like, you so
Yeah.
easily think, "Oh, I'm just, this doesn't matter. My story is, it wasn't that bad," and then there's
Mhm.
always something that
Right. Yeah.
reminds me. It's either that or I should say that one thing that has fueled me all along are stories of people who went to Grenville or the community who are reaching out to me and sharing their story and their pain with me. And I've carried those stories like a burden for
Mhm.
decades now. It's been, well, It's been almost 2 decades, and I carry those, and, just when I think, "Okay, maybe this isn't worth it," I read something that someone sends to me, and I realize we're doing the right thing. I need to do this, and it
Mhm,
matters. And
mhm,
now it matters not just for our story. It
mhm.
matters it matters to society now. And I mean, I'm really scared of what's happening with weaponized religion on a broad scale. And I feel like our story is an important cautionary tale about what can happen, not just in cults, but with private religious schools, unregulated.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I see today the headline was Trump is going to sign the dismantling of the Department of Education. And I mean, I just feel so much fear, and I'm not even from the US, but I see the writing on that wall. And
Mhm,
it's,
mhm,
you can get away with so much behind the closed doors of a private institution. And if
mhm.
it's not being regulated, um, the damage, the ripple effects are just impossible to quantify. So, anyway.
Right, and right,
Yeah.
and the language makes most people nervous, especially people who have been involved in cults and who have been in fundamentalist anything,
Yes.
to hear about this, the dismantling of, funding for, people who are disadvantaged, people who have special needs.
Mm. Ah, fun.
But that they will foster a curriculum that is religious and patriotic. That was the
Yes.
term. Thought, "Oh,
They're
that's
just
chilling."
indoctrinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Very, very chilling, and we also don't know really what that means and what that's
No.
going to look like, but it's terrifying. So, I think also what's interesting too, and I'm thinking about your psychologist, being kind of a frame of reference for you just by the way she was responding to your
Mhm.
journal entries. I often joke that I could never play poker, that people know exactly that I'm having a reaction,
Yeah.
as soon as I'm having the reaction. Um, and I think about I'm sure it's happened because it just happened, and you've said a lot of things that where I raised an eyebrow. Um, but the things that you say that were just perfunctory, commonplace,
Yeah.
but that, are shocking to people hearing it, especially someone like me who is a teacher, so I have a background in child development and I'm a therapist, right? And I get where some of these things are going to cause lasting impact and lifelong impact. Just the phrase that you used before, which was, and I thought that maybe if I lost weight, they'd let me live with my parents.
Yeah.
What? Right?
I know.
That the conditionality of the relationships, of the connection between parent and child, is shocking, and those things should remain shocking to anyone who hears them, even though that was your life, and
Yeah.
so you can think, "Oh, well, that's just sort of how it was." It should never have been.
Thank you. I mean, I'm almost 55, and I'm still dealing. I'm almost no, I mean, I'm still dealing with an eating disorder. I would like to say I'm almost there, but it's been so impactful. And, I was a 5-year-old being told that, I was so full of sin, I couldn't eat the way the other kids were, just like, but, the I guess the only silver lining is that I had such a raging eating disorder when I left that I needed help sooner than a lot of people have. I've often looked at other people who left and thought, how did they've seemed to be able to handle life, better than I did. But the trauma has caught up with them too. But
Mm,
for me, it caught up because of the eating disorder, and that's why I needed help. And I was gonna say the same psychologist when I finally got diagnosed with bulimia and PTSD. That was
yeah,
before complex PTSD came in.
right,
Um,
right.
it was about 2006, and she looked at me and said, "I'm not going to touch your eating disorder with a 10-foot pole because there's so much more going on underneath." And I looked at her
Mhm.
in so much confusion, thinking, "Do you mean there's a reason why I can't stop binging apart from my sin?" I was all ears. I had no idea. Like, what? What?
Right.
Tell me. Like, Is there really, like, is there something going on other than the fact that I'm a sinner? Because,
Right.
I had no clue that I had been damaged, and, it's taken years to understand it, which is why writing the book meant so much to me because I kept feeling, I had the sense that I was writing for so many more than just me, and that also propelled me forward every day that I came into my room and knowing that it would be painful to write. But I was just trying to write a book that I needed, because you often read memoirs that are really inspiring. And in the case of cults, they finally get out and you're just so happy for them. But
Yeah.
what happened next? Like
Right,
how
right.
how do how do they manage the next several decades, you know?
Mhm,
Are they as
mhm.
much of a basket case as I am? Like what's wrong with me? So, yeah, and I mean, I go into much more detail about the pitfalls of different things I tried on the road to recovery, like medications. I may have
Yeah,
mentioned that I
right.
had to go through the withdrawal from medications, but what I've learned with medications is they're just a Band-Aid, and if you have such deep wounds, they're not going to address those open wounds. They might help you cope day to day for a while,
Mhm, mhm,
but, at best, they'll mask it, you
mhm.
know, and
Right.
it will not go away, and I've learned so much with the eating disorder. I talk about it in the book, and I wanted my book to be really helpful to people with eating disorder. And another thing I talk about is, or I've realized is that if you turn to the church for help when you've been abused by religion, you're not going to get the help you need.
Mm,
In my opinion, at least in my experience,
yeah.
I tried that. I was so lonely, so, desperate for community, and I went back looking for another church,
Mhm,
and I just couldn't understand, why am I crying every time I go to church? Like,
mhm.
I must be such a sinner.
Right? Yeah,
But I
yeah.
finally, stopped because my son's hockey schedule interfered, and we chose hockey over church. Anyway, but,
Right. There was
yeah.
an interesting meme, I mean, also being the mom of 3 who are now young adults, but there
Mhm.
was a funny thing that said, like an imaginary dialogue, a parent saying, "Oh, now that my kids are not infants anymore, I finally get to sleep in." And then, um, uh, childhood sports says, "Not so fast."
Yeah, right.
Right.
6
So
AM, 7 AM hockey
7
practice.
right, 2 hours away, right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Anyway, but I think, there are some clergy people who I really respect in these realms because they're open to learning about cults, and
Oh, that's
some of
good.
them also have counseling backgrounds, and they decided to become clergy sometimes after having a counseling background, or they got one in addition to, and that can be very helpful. It's a rarity, though, unfortunately, and so people do sometimes look for communities and are hoping that it feels healing, and it's just sort of it can feel like more of the same of here, just do this or, you know,
Yeah.
and it
I'm glad
doesn't
you
have the
mentioned that
answer. Yeah.
because I do think I'd like to think that there are many, safe spaces in churches.
Mm, mhm.
In fact, I actually chose a church where I'm still friends with the priest. Um, they're actually gonna come to my book launch next month.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
Which is awesome. And, they cared about the lawsuit, even though we were naming the Anglican Church in the lawsuit, which the Anglican Church actually got out of that. They had good
Uh-huh.
lawyers. But, but, um, the point is that they're good people and they meant well. But I had so much trauma that it didn't matter what he said or how kind he was. I couldn't, it wasn't doing me any good to be there.
Right, right, and
So,
part of healing is recognizing what's working for you and what isn't, and acting on that, and
mhm.
knowing that you have the freedom to do that, and that you can change your mind,
Yeah,
and
and
that's
learning that
enough.
it's okay that, like learning even though you're still afraid of hell, that maybe you can live a different way and still have that uncertainty, but it's okay to not know. Do you know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm,
still don't
mhm,
know. I still wonder, is that true? Like,
mhm.
it still bothers me. But learning that you don't have to live in paranoia,
Yeah, right.
um, just because you were told those stories again and again and again. Um,
Yeah, and I wanna actually ask about that. I know we're coming close to the end of
yeah.
our time, and I wanted just also to say something about eating disorders because
Mm,
just like with so many things, it's about that and it's not. It's
yeah.
about so many other things, and that it's part of the reason that I have an issue with a lot of 12-step programs that decide everyone there is an alcoholic. No. And so I think that labeling is sometimes helpful so that you can get help for that, but it's about making sure that you, do self-care or that you have sustenance or that you're able to feed yourself in so many ways and that
Mhm.
you have the freedom to do that and exercising that freedom and really kind of being a parent to yourself in some
Yeah.
ways. I mean, there are a lot of things tied in with it that an oversimplification on the part of a lot of professionals that
Yeah.
just dive into it as this is a disorder that we're going to treat as this when it often is about so many other things. And people are conditioned throughout their lives. People who have been raised in cults where there was sometimes no food on the compound
Mm.
or in that school and the refrigerator was bare or it was locked so they couldn't
Oh,
get
yeah.
to it. I think about my mom who lived through the depression
Yeah.
and I we joke together now that she has the smallest Tupperware that I've ever seen, so that if there's one olive that's left over,
That's
she
so
saves
nice.
it, right?
Yeah.
And it makes her feel good because
Yeah.
she ate potatoes for however many weeks and then an apple for,
Oh my gosh.
and so,
Yeah.
right, you get conditioned to feel like, "I just wanna know that I have and that I can if I
Yeah.
need or I want," and so it's so
Yeah.
about that.
I think you're touching on so many important, complex issues, but I think when it boils down to it, what I've had to learn the hard way is that diet culture, even if you're not involved in church, diet culture is all about shame.
Mm,
And uh, we're being influenced from the get go to be ashamed of our bodies and the size that, whatever size they are. And you mix that in with the shame of sin, and
mhm,
you have a really very dangerous combination, a very damaging combination. And so I had to learn, like you said, that I don't have to be ashamed of my appetite. I don't have to be ashamed of my body. And this is really hard to learn when you're so scared of being fat or gaining weight. But and relearn to parent yourself and actually trust your desires and your appetite and
mm,
actually feel the pain of the fear of your appetite. It's just like it's all very complicated. But
yeah,
what I learned in essence is that you can't try to control and you can't try to restrict because that's the problem in the beginning, and that's all fueled by shame. So,
mhm, mhm,
yeah, it's been a real journey, like a full circle journey to come back to where I was when I was 5, eating like
mhm,
a normal 5-year-old with my desires of hunger. And
mhm,
now I'm very close to not being worried about it, at all. I basically eat what I want, and I am more comfortable in my skin than I ever have been. But I still need help. So,
yeah,
it's
right,
a
right.
journey. Yeah.
It is a journey, and so I'm wondering just as we're finishing up, if
Yeah.
there are things that I mean, there's a lot more, of course, to talk about, but there always is, but if there is something else you wanted to make sure to mention or a point you wanted to make, and then I also want people to know about where to find you and your book, so go for it.
I guess I just want to say if you have experienced high control religion or a cult, um, to be really patient with yourself and to know that it takes years to unravel all of the trauma and the abuse, and you probably won't understand it for quite some time. And just to try to be patient with yourself and listen to podcasts like this. To your I'm preaching to the choir, right? But
Mhm.
but read the memoirs, read follow the people who like Rachel who are doing this work, and because it's such a lonely, confusing time going through recovery, and many therapists don't understand. So yeah, I just want to shout out to anybody going through it.
Yes, but it is lonely and it is confusing, and, people also will ask me, "How long will it take?"
Mm,
And, when we talk about sort of giving yourself grace and patience, the answer is often it takes as long as it takes, and just try to get the kind of support that you need. And I think also don't feel that you have to settle, that you don't have to talk to a therapist who really doesn't get it or just keeps wanting to bring up other subjects because they just are not
mhm.
willing to kind of learn about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And luckily now there are so many wonderful resources online, um, and it's becoming much more understood than it was when I left. So yeah, but I think it's a journey of a lifetime for many of us. I don't
Mhm.
think I
Mhm.
don't think it's something you get over really
Mhm.
completely.
Right. Yeah. There's an interesting phrase that I came across with someone who was talking actually about grief. And that he was sort of talking about how people say you need to be able to, get through the grief and then you can move on. And he was saying, actually, no, you move on with the grief, that, you still are able to take steps forward, but holding on to your experience and the emotions and knowing that that's just going to be a part of your life.
I
Uh,
agree completely. It's a perfect analogy. Yeah.
and so I wonder also about where people can find the book and where they can find you online or if they want to be in touch.
Oh, that'd be great. I have a website. It's www.bethgranger.ca. CA for Canada. And from there, you can find me on, the socials, and you can contact me. And I'm also on Substack, and my book is there too. So that's pretty much the easiest way.
Very
Love to hear
nice.
from people.
Yeah. Well, I like how you said triple W. That's a really good way of shortening that. Always wondered how to do that. Thank you for that.
That's funny.
So thank you. Thank you, Beth, for everything that you do and for taking the time that was for your healing to write things down, but has been, I'm sure, a source of healing for many others who have read your words and know they're not alone. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was the whole goal, and it's happening.
Yeah, definitely happening. Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.